welcome. Let's dive into John chapter 7. Imagine a city so tense, it feels like a powder keg with a lit fuse. Now, picture a man with a target on his back walking right into the middle of it all. That's the scene, and we're about to walk through this high-stakes thriller, verse by verse. This is really the question at the heart of it all, isn't it? We're about to see a story of incredible public danger, where the people in power want someone dead, and shocking private betrayal, where his own brothers basically dare him to walk right into the trap. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start with a big public showdown. It starts quietly, with a private betrayal. We're in the relative safety of Galilee, and the first threat Jesus faces comes from the last place you'd expect, his own family. Okay, let's jump right in. Verse 1 tells us Jesus is staying put in Galilee. And why? Because down in Judea, the religious leaders are actively trying to kill him. He is a wanted man. Then verse 2 sets the scene. The Feast of Tabernacles is coming up. This is a huge, week-long festival in Jerusalem, the very center of the danger. So what happens in verse 3? His own brothers come to him and say, "Hey, you should head down to Judea." They're literally pointing him toward the line of fire. And their challenge to him in verse 4 is just dripping with sarcasm. You can almost hear the sneer in their voices. This isn't encouragement, it's a taunt. They're basically saying, if you're as important as you say you are, stop hiding out in the middle of nowhere and go prove it on the biggest stage. Verse 5 just lays out the heartbreaking reason why, for even his brothers did not believe in him. This is a cynical dare, plain and simple. Now, Jesus' response in verse 6 is so important. He says, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready." See, he's operating on God's timetable, not theirs. In verse 7, he explains exactly why he's a target. The world hates me because I testify that its works are evil. He's a living threat to their whole system. So in verse 8, he tells them, "You go on ahead." And verse 9 shows him staying behind as they leave for Jerusalem. But don't let that fool you. Jesus isn't skipping the festival. Oh no, he's just changing the plan. The whole scene now shifts to Jerusalem, and Jesus enters the city not like a visiting celebrity, but like a fugitive. So in verse 10, what do we see? Jesus slips into Jerusalem, but not openly, but as it were in secret. Just picture that, hood up, staying in the shadows of the back alleys of this bustling city. Meanwhile, verse 11 tells us the authorities are already looking for him, their eyes scanning every face in the massive crowds, asking everyone, where is he? The hunt is on. And the whole city is buzzing about him. Verse 12 says there was a lot of murmuring among the people. Some were whispering, "He's a good man." Others would fire back, "No, he's deceiving everyone." The city is totally split. But here's the kicker in verse 13. No one spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. The leadership had created such an atmosphere of intimidation that nobody dared to say what they really thought out loud. But Jesus isn't going to stay in the shadows for long. Not a chance. Right in the middle of the festival, he makes his move. He walks directly into the lion's den to confront the authorities on their home turf, the temple itself. So, verse 14, bam, Jesus walks into the temple and just starts teaching. And in verse 15, the religious leaders are absolutely stunned. They're looking at each other wondering, how does this guy know all this? He's never been to any of our schools. Jesus' answer in verse 16 is a direct shot at their authority. My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. He's claiming his teaching comes straight from God. And in verses 17 and 18, he lays down a challenge. He says if you truly want to do God's will, you'll know his teaching is true, because he's not looking for his own glory, he's only seeking glory for the one who sent him. And then Jesus just cuts through all the theological talk. He looks them dead in the eye, and in verse 19, he drops this absolute bombshell, exposing the dark secret they've been hiding in plain sight. Now, the crowd has no idea about the murder plot. So in verse 20, they're shocked. They yell back, "You have a demon! Who's trying to kill you?" But Jesus, in verse 21, just pivots. He brings up a past event, when he healed a paralyzed man on the Sabbath. Then, in verses 22 and 23, he lays out this brilliant argument. He says, look, you guys will perform a circumcision on the Sabbath to follow the law of Moses. So why are you furious with me for making a man's entire body well on the Sabbath? And then he delivers the final blow in verse 24. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. This public showdown just electrifies the crowd. The debate explodes. It's no longer just the leaders arguing. Now everyone in Jerusalem is trying to figure out, who is this man? So in verses 25 and 26, The people are confused. They see Jesus speaking freely, and the powerful leaders are doing absolutely nothing. They start whispering, wait, could it be? Do the rulers actually know he's the Messiah? But then, in verse 27, they hit a snag. They think, we know where this guy is from, Galilee, but when the Christ comes, nobody will know where he's from. Hearing this, Jesus cries out in verses 28 and 29. He tells them, yeah, you might know my earthly home, but you have no idea about my true heavenly origin. Well, for the leaders, that's the last straw. Verse 30 says they tried to seize him right then and there, but they couldn't. Why? Because his hour had not yet come. And the result, in verse 31, many in the crowd started to believe. The leaders are seeing red. Verse 32 tells us that the Pharisees and chief priests hear that the crowd is turning, and they've had enough. They officially send temple guards to arrest him. Jesus sees them coming, but in verses 33 and 34, he gives this cryptic message: I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me and not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. His enemies are just left standing there, totally baffled. In verses 35 and 36, they're scratching their heads, wondering if he's going to flee the country, completely missing the profound spiritual meaning of what he just said. Okay, everything so far has been building to this moment. We're at the climax of the entire festival. It's the final, most important day, and Jesus steps into the spotlight to make the most powerful, most dramatic proclamation of the whole chapter. You've got to picture the scene. It's the last day of the feast, the great day. The temple courtyard is packed, it's hot, it's dusty, and right in the middle of it all, verse 37 says, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. What an incredible invitation to a thirsty crowd in a dry land. And then he follows it up with this unbelievable promise in verse 38. He who believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. He's not talking about a cup of water to quench your physical thirst. He's promising an endless, internal, gushing spring of spiritual life. So, how does the crowd take this radical statement? Well, they split. Hard. This one proclamation just divides them right down the middle, instantly creating two passionate, opposing sides. Now, verse 39 clarifies for us that this living water is the Holy Spirit. And the crowd's reaction is instantaneous. In verse 40, some are totally convinced this is the prophet for sure. Verse 41 shows others taking it a step further. This is the Christ. But then the argument breaks out in verses 41 and 42. Some people push back, saying, wait, the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem, not Galilee. Verse 43 just sums it all up. So there was a division among the people because of him. And right in the middle of all this chaos, verse 44 tells us the guards try again to arrest him, and again they fail. All right, the party's over, the festival is winding down, and the authorities have completely failed. This final part of the chapter is all about the fallout. The temple guards have to go back to their bosses empty-handed and face the music. So in verse 45, the officers report back to the chief priests, who are furious. Why didn't you bring him? They demand. The guards' answer in verse 46 is just incredible. They say, no man ever spoke like this man. They were completely captivated by him. But the Pharisees' response in verses 47 through 49 is just pure elitist contempt. They sneer, are you deceived too? Have any of us rulers believed in him? No. But this crowd that doesn't know the law, they're cursed. But then in verses 50 and 51, a voice of reason speaks up from an unexpected place. Nicodemus, one of their own, reminds them, hey, does our law judge a man before we hear him out? Their response in verse 52 isn't a legal counterargument. It's a personal attack. They just mock him for siding with a Galilean. And then verse 53, the chapter ends with this eerie, unsettling silence. The meeting just breaks up, and everyone went to his own house. The conflict is just left hanging in the air. And that just perfectly captures the tension. The day ends with a pause, not a resolution. The leaders are furious, their own guards are in awe, the people are completely divided, and Jesus is still free. The stage is set, the battle lines are drawn, and you're left wondering, what on earth is going to happen when the sun rises on this divided city?